to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fawcett. Each week we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. In our show today, we look at using AI in higher education. I'm joined by Mike Dillon, CEO of ElastiForce. Mike, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I
want to
I'm
give
I'm
you
ex-
a. Go
yeah,
ahead.
no, go ahead. I was going to say I want to. I've done a few shows on higher ed, and so this time though, I think we have some really interesting things to frame this, and so I'm excited to do the show. I think there's some really interesting things happening around student experience, and then about some of the other ways that you can use AI in education. So again, I appreciate you joining. I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion. So if you could start though, just give us a brief introduction and tell us a little bit about ElastiForce and kind of what you're doing with AI.
Fantastic, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm Mike Dillon, again, CEO of ElastiForce, a technology consulting and software development company. I've spent 21 years leading a global Oracle and PeopleSoft consulting practice that focused in on higher education primarily, but also public sector and healthcare. It's in the last 8 years, though, that I've been fortunate enough to work for two of the premier AI thought leaders, PwC and Deloitte. As a partner at PwC 8 years ago, the firm made a big bet in AI with a commitment to hire 3,000 AI technologists within a year. I was fortunate enough to work with some of those AI luminaries and co-wrote a paper on how we saw AI being used in higher education, kind of a foreshadow of where it might go. And then later at Deloitte, I worked on developing AI solutions for higher ed, including student recruitment and retention solution. And Deloitte at the time was making AI ubiquitous in all of its internal administrative functions and then externally in its project tools and accelerators. And now, of course, I have a great pleasure of leading a company with AI experts that have developed solutions for Walmart, Coca-Cola, and Philips, just to name a few.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
great, kind of background here on my experience. And
Yeah, no, that's great. So based on that, I'd love to just like before we go into the details of the use cases, I think it's probably useful to just talk a little bit more about kind of across higher ed. What do you see, as some of the types of ways that AI, generative AI, or even other new technologies like VR, AR, that sort of thing, could be used in higher ed from a high perspective first, and then we'll dig into a couple of use cases.
Sure. We're very, very beginning in terms of the adoption of AI for higher ed. But just to step back, I mean, we're clearly at a turning point in history. This is as important an invention as the CPU or the mobile phone and the convergence of tech that's gone into the phone and EV or electric vehicles. So, but the mobile phone actually. The development provides a great analogy for where we're at. The mobile phone started with limited use, limited purpose, continued to expand and enhance our lives. And now, for instance, I'm not forgetting what I need at the grocery store because of the phone. I don't miss candid picture shots because of the phone.
Mhm.
And never would we have imagined that back in the 90s, right? Or late 90s and early 2000s. And then, I guess if we look at Chat GPT, the launch of that really created accessibility to AI
Right.
and created an explosion of interest, right? So in terms of higher education, the industry has been a little slower to adopt new technology in general, but particularly AI. And in particular, I think whenever there's an ethical issue with technology or privacy concerns, which both exist here, the industry is very thoughtful. They'll create committees. They'll think about it first. They want to get it right the first time they go to deploy. So, and it's hard not to jump into use cases, but first,
Yeah, no,
I'm going to try. So,
no, go ahead.
first, we know no AI is not one thing, right? It's an umbrella term for a variety of models, use cases, technology, right? And this is a great time for this technology to emerge, and for higher education to harness it. To put the context of where higher education is, and this, there's probably never been a more challenging time for the industry. Higher
Mm.
education is being asked to be more efficient, drive down cost. And then you've got these societal questions about, hey, what's the return on investment on a college degree? Should we
Right.
just be educating for skill sets and competencies and not a full degree program? Um,
Mm.
in addition to that, higher education also tends to not offer the most competitive salaries. So the industry
Mm.
struggles with talent acquisition and employee retention. Being able to do more with less is critically important, and offering a premium employee experience is also really critical.
Mm.
And then we think about AI, and it can help across a spectrum of administrative functions. As we see in other industries, right? The use of RPA and
Mm.
machine learning to complete
Yep.
complex tasks, repetitive, tasks, automation of functions, and
Mm.
a higher ed can certainly do that. Internal audit, immediacy of information in customer service, whether that be for students or other stakeholders, and
Mm.
provide real-time planning adjustments. Additionally, AI and augmented reality have what I'm excited about is tremendous application in learning. For
Right.
instance, augmented reality can create immersive learning environments. AI can help remove bias in assessments.
Mm.
Um, Generative AI is probably a really interesting one, because right now it seems like the focus is all on let's detect the use of AI tools and judge the student based on that, or
Mm.
disciplinary actions taken, instead of determining how can we be used to provide a greater foundation to
Right.
advance the student's learning, right? um,
Yep.
and we could be harnessing it and still evaluating the student's learning, the human analysis that goes into it, the
Right.
extensions of a work product that may have been assisted by AI. Um,
Yep.
we can imagine uh, other potential uses is how to remove bias from
Mm.
assessments. So that, and
Yeah.
we could talk about that in a little bit more detail. I think that the
Yep.
one technology that's probably the biggest challenge is blockchain, because we really haven't
Mm.
figured out necessarily. There doesn't seem to be yet. There's a lot of ideas about how to use blockchain, but there hasn't really been a standard use case or standard use cases yet. So that's an emerging one. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good overview, I think, and you hit on a couple of the interesting pressures on the industry itself, and I've done a fair bit with a couple other shows, talking about the should we use it, should we not, is it cheating, is it not, is it, and the sort of the I guess the biggest point that came out of those conversations is that if education is supposed to prepare you for your career, it better be helping you understand how to, with the human in the loop, of course, use generative AI and AI in your daily activities. Because the reality is, when you get in the workforce, you're not going to have a choice. You're going to be thrust into that, and you need to be prepared. So I think that's it's an interesting problem to observe. But one of the things you hit on, and I think is really interesting, and I'm curious about this, is as institutions try to justify themselves more and the cost and everything around that. How do we how are institutions thinking about student experience? I mean, we talk about customer experience in business in general a lot, and I assume the same is true for student experience. So how can institutions use AI and other tech to improve their student experience?
Yeah, really critically important. Um, and I think what we see at the most basic level, right, is the immediacy of access to information. And oftentimes students
Mhm.
struggle with, hey, what's the policy on this issue or procedure, and or critical due dates? Can I get nudges and
Mhm.
reminders? Right. Another useful AI aid is assisting students in optimizing the selection of classes. You can imagine, they may
Mm.
only want to go to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and can it assist them both in their desired schedules, their degree requirements, their academic interests, let's say also capturing courses where the prior courses where they had success with certain professors, and then
Mm,
being able to put all that together and make some proactive
mm,
class recommendations. That would be a great use
yeah.
case. Uh, Student recruiting is another one, and again, immediacy of information as you go through the
Mm,
admission process. Academic program selection in student recruiting, like really
mm,
assisting the student to make the right choices. And obviously, we see virtual campus tours, which I think are helpful, but maybe going a little deeper in virtual campus life experiences would be neat.
mm.
Um,
It would, yeah.
and yeah, and then one of the really great uh, use cases that actually is deployed is with the Virginia Community College system, and they launched an AI wizard.
Mm,
And what this does, which is very unique and very important and very timely, given all the criticisms or critiques of higher ed and uh, whether it leads to an ROI. So
mm,
the wizard that Virginia Community College system launched actually helps students with career planning and course planner
mm,
based on assessments. So what it does, they've got this tool called Imagine, which assesses the desire of the student in terms of what their
mm.
postgraduate needs will be in terms of income and lifestyle and where they want to live in the state. So it takes all that into account and will help direct the student to a program that will lead to the income that they need to sustain the lifestyle that they want. So, which is
That's
absolutely 100% fantastic, forward thinking.
yeah.
And they do something similar with veterans. So, because of where they're located, they
Mm,
help the veterans evaluate their experience and help them select the best options for civilian careers based on their military experience, and then directs them to a veteran representative that'll assist them with benefits and financial aid. So really, really cool use
mm,
cases. And then for financial aid in general, I think the processing and
mm,
responsiveness are really important. And I was just had a podcast with Jenny Ricard and she's the CEO of Common App. And one of the things that they're
mm,
really helping do is advance access. And students often self-limit themselves on what they think they can do and whether they
mm.
apply. And some students apply and then they don't actually follow or they start the
Sure.
application process and fall through. But there's a number of ways AI can certainly assist in that effort.
Mm,
And then creation of student success aids that helps the student throughout their career. Uh,
mm,
Involvement suggestions. So there's a line of thought about not even thought, it's research about how student involvement is a key indicator of success in graduation. So the more that the student is attached to the institution, the higher the likelihood of success in their career, their college career.
mm.
And then
Interesting.
another another interesting one would be preparedness for post graduation. I don't think we focus a lot on career placement, right? But not
Right.
necessarily on the transition from college life to a life without all those students around you, without that
Mm,
community. And I think we could certainly benefit from personal assessments to figure out how do we ease that transition for students
mm,
into the workforce with the lack of that larger community that they've
sure.
become accustomed to. So anyway,
Hmm.
that's a few thoughts.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, and I think the idea of virtual assistants, obviously it's getting a lot of play in business in general, and applying it in this situation is really interesting to help you navigate, the new environment, find the right classes. I mean, I would have loved that. That would have been fantastic, right? To be able
Yeah,
to go through and put all your put all the context in to help you get to the I only want Tuesday afternoon at 3 and whatever.
yeah.
Um, that's great. I like it. So that leads me into kind of another part of this though, because then part of what you're talking about really is personalizing the experience, and I wonder if it's also going to start to be applied to personalize the actual instruction itself. So could AI be used to benefit personalized learning for students and institutions?
Yeah, and I think we're really at the forefront of seeing this emerge. But
Mm,
yeah, people, students, doesn't matter. We all have different learning styles. The most simplistic, difference is those that can read, conceptualize, and those that
Mhm.
really need to experience. It needs to be more of a visual
Mhm.
or contextual approach. So, and this is actually occurring already, but it's small instances, not widespread. But can you imagine an immersive experience where a chemistry student walks into a room that is actually a virtual room where they've got atomic makeup of compounds and they're being able to change it with their hands and see
Mhm.
the chemical reactions, or a history
That's
student,
cool.
whether it's at the campus or say they're doing a site visit somewhere and they're able to walk through a historical site and being able to see how it changes over hundreds
Mhm.
of, or thousands of years, and the accompanying social changes, right? Totally immersive experience. And then you can think about environmental science students and being able to see climate change in an area and being able to see how that impacted the geography
Mhm.
and the animals, and I mean the climate change is so huge and impactful, and we're seeing it everywhere. And I was recently in Africa, and you know we missed the great migration because of the weather pattern changes, and
Mhm.
the rainfall didn't occur when it was supposed to. But anyway, that's one area. I think the other area that's really exciting, uh, because there's bias in probably anything we do, right? And you just try to
Mhm.
reduce the amount of. You're not going to eliminate
Yeah.
it, but you reduce it. But for assessments, adaptive questionings is one way to
Mm.
remove bias. So you can ask a student a question in one way. That student, depending on their learning, they may know the subject but don't understand the question. So one of the things is having these smart tests where I'll ask the question one way. If the student gets it wrong, I'm going to ask it a different way to make
Mhm.
sure that did they know the content or not know the content. And you can take that the other way too. You can take a student that answers it correctly, and you say, okay, let me find out how deep this student's knowledge may be
Mhm.
way more advanced than I'm actually expecting, and let me take them down a different path of questions. So it's really both personalizing the experience and the learning, but personalizing the assessment as well to make
Right.
sure that you're really evaluating the student correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've seen in businesses the start of the skills based approach for jobs. So I'm going to assess you and individually design the job around the skills that you have or the skills that I know I can build off of that you have. And it seems like that's the same kind of thing here, right? I can assess you, understand where you have strengths and where you have weaknesses, and then even adapt to the style to present that in a way that lets you much more effectively absorb this information, and then also maybe even have an assistant that goes with you that can help you get back to some of that information later if you need it in other classes or even outside of the institution. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly. And
that's
fill in
really
the
cool.
gaps, right? I'll know
Yeah,
where your
yeah,
gaps are. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, one of the things I hear about, and I guess we all saw this too when we were in college, that there's always some amount of attrition in that environment. It's a tough environment. It's different. It's a
Mhm.
big change a lot of times. So we have these, I guess we call them at risk students. How can AI assist with that? I mean, or can it assist? Have institutions help them work with and try to mitigate some of the problems around at risk students?
Yeah, and unfortunately, what the populations that tend to be impacted at most, are not just academically
Mm.
disadvantaged, but maybe experiential, right? First time college student in a family, or there could be bias and race or whatever within the
Mm.
institution. And anyway, yeah, the loss of human potential is a paramount issue, and it impacts the institution as well, right? Like the biggest loss is the human loss, but
Right.
institutions invest money in recruiting students and use institutional resources. So to not have a student progress all the way through degree completion is it's a big loss to the institution. Anyway,
Mm.
um, I think part of this is we need better predictive analytics and
Yeah.
personal interventions. And for effective AI interventions, we need access to data, right? So really, you need to
Mm.
almost back up and say we need an integrated data platform that provides a holistic view of the student. that AI can assess, so that it knows how to intervene, right, and how
Mm.
to make suggestions. Um, and I think traditionally we've looked at it and we've said, okay, uh, uh, we'll look at classroom performance. Somebody's doing poorly, maybe on a midterm, and financial aid data. We see that maybe somebody's struggling on that side of the house, and then
Mm.
you put those two together, and that's all it is. But there's so much more involved in what's going on with institutions. And one of the schools, and it doesn't have, to build a model and to get interventions like this doesn't have to be a wealthy school. So Ivy Tech Community College is using predictive analytics with almost 80% accuracy to
Wow.
identify students that are likely to struggle in a specific
Mm.
course. So they're identifying this at the time of enrollment and being able to actually intervene early and suggest, hey, if you may struggle with this course. If you do, here's some other options. Here's either tutorial support and or alternative courses, because it's still early enough into the term that they can switch courses. And then
Yeah.
and so that's really going back to being proactive and personalized, and
Mm.
identifying, students, and it's sort of like the collection of information that's needed uh, beyond academics and financial aid. We can look at data like student health and mental well-being, and
Mm.
if a student suddenly is showing up to the health services frequently, like a dramatic increase, we're like, oh, that person might also that now have an issue with uh, their coursework, right? So
Mm.
can I jump in and say, hey, I just want to we want to see if you need
Yeah.
some extra support academically, right? So, but it all goes back also that AI is only going to be as smart as the information you feed it, and
Right.
it could be biased in what you feed it. So it's about having as much of a comprehensive view as you can.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's that's interesting, and I know for years we've talked about customer 360 in business, right? Trying to get all of that data together in a way that's usable, and I suspect that it's probably the same sort of problem here. And as you say, with data and data quality goes your programs with AI and Gen AI, right? I mean, you have to have good quality data. You have to have complete pictures, or you're not going to be able to do a lot of these things. So, are there challenges that are similar to what I've seen in business in the institution to build out this complete view of the student, and how are they starting to overcome that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and maybe more. And I'll say maybe, but maybe more complicated in higher ed, because there's so many disparate systems
Mm.
that capture information about the student, and so it goes back, and a lot of it unstructured data, right? And so
Mm.
you really need the data lake. So you can get a comprehensive view of the student, and maybe you're never going to get 360, but maybe we can get 260, right? Maybe we can get close. So
Right.
uh, but and the very first part of this whole thing, especially for higher ed, is developing a comprehensive ethics policy,
Mm.
and ensuring the security of the data, right, and that it's being used appropriately. But that starts. So there's all kinds of challenges around privacy rights,
Right.
and even back to that healthcare example, even though students don't fall under HIPAA, they fall under FERPA. There's still a question about the sensitivity of healthcare information, which is critically important. If we look at higher ed today, the escalation of mental health and well-being issues has dramatically increased, and the spend on it has dramatically increased over the years, and it has an influence on student performance. So
Mm.
anyway, we may not get to 360, but we certainly can get closer. So looking
Yeah,
forward to that time.
Yeah, right, and I mean that's interesting too. You bring up the point with the healthcare data and other extraneous signals that could help. I mean that is if you're trying to mitigate risk and help at-risk students to overcome whatever that is. I mean, anxiety or stress or any of those things certainly come into play. So yeah, I can see where that would be a challenge. Um, so we talked a little bit, or you mentioned ROI, and that's not something that maybe people have thought as much about, although lately it's been a hot topic because of student debt and all the other sort of things that have come out over the last few years. So What's how can AI help institutions when they're trying to improve the ROI for their students?
Yeah, and I know we touched on a number of them, but certainly, from the traditional institutional perspective, we can lower operating costs,
Mm,
um, which hopefully would translate, but it probably won't, into lower cost
yeah.
of attendance for students. But at least it may mitigate future increases in cost,
Mm,
improvements in services, faculty, staff, and students, higher graduation rates, assuming that we get um, better information to students for coursework planning and a
right.
quicker responsiveness to at-risk students, and then career placement, right? Getting
Mm,
income appropriate jobs given their higher education degree. But one of the factors that tends not to be in the evaluation of ROI and probably should be is the institution's impact on the student's success and learning. So,
mm,
and this goes back to the idea of institutional effectiveness, right? So, Sandy Aston was the founder of UCLA's Higher Education Research Institute, which
mm,
has the longest running longitudinal study about um, student success as well as institutional effectiveness.
mm,
And one of the things that he um, researched was, we oftentimes we're it's the United States, we are constantly comparing things on a prestige hierarchy, and
mm,
he wanted to flip things around to say, if a Princeton or a Yale, they bring in high caliber, high ability students, and they produce more graduates, higher graduation rates, higher students, more students going on to graduate school. You
mm,
know, you kind of expect that outcome. What I'd like to, well, what he'd like to do, is evaluate institutions on. Let me take a student that may not have the highest aptitude and see how far I can stretch them.
mm.
And which I really like. It gets us
Yeah.
away from sort of the prestige culture to evaluate an institution and back to institutional effectiveness.
Mm,
And I'm going to deviate just real quick.
yeah.
Another thing about just human capacity, right? There's a case study of national education systems, and
Mm,
it really focuses around human potential. But the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, so OECD, in 2000, and then every 3 years afterward, would take 15-year-olds from around the globe and have them take this PISA test, PISA, which is a standardized test for math, reading, and science. Um, the expectation when they launched this is that it's going to be Japan, Korea, um,
mm,
some European countries that will wind up on top. That high
mm,
performing, great educational system. They're going to be the ones. It turned out that Finland, which had historically been a total mediocre performer, got to
mm.
the top of the list. Was the top in terms of performance, and
Interesting.
and to see how the distance traveled, so to speak, is in the 60s. 89% of Finns didn't make it past the ninth grade, but then yet
Wow.
in 2000 they captured the top spot, and Finland
Crazy.
won again in 2003. So between 2000 and 2003, OECD said, "Hey, we must have a flaw in our system because there's no way
How could
that
that
Finland
possibly
should have
be?
won."
Yeah.
Yeah. So and they win again, and then fast forward 2012, they completely changed the aptitude test, and Finland won again in 2012. So the interesting thing is that and this was a change in culture. So when they tried to dissect, and all these experts went to Finland, they tried to dissect what are they doing that's right, and they couldn't
Hmm,
pinpoint any common thread,
interesting.
except for they were deploying different things, and the schools were doing all sorts of different things. But the cultural change was that they had the mindset that evolved over time that we can't afford to lose a brain. And that
Mm,
literally is their mantra. We can't afford to lose a brain. So they had this ethos to not focus on students early in their educational career and focus completely on the high ability students. They wanted to stretch every
mm,
student regardless of their apparent ability. And they also didn't have a practice of holding students back when they couldn't keep up. So instead, they had a plan, or basically everybody just, or culturally, they decided we're going to intervene. We are going to engage with those students that are slow on the uptick, and we're going to help them catch up instead of holding back. So, with the lens of reacting, or sorry, with the lens of reaching human capital and human potential, the use of AI, generative AI, augmented reality, is going to help elevate education. The interventions that we have will hopefully uplift students. How we assess their knowledge will change and be more accurate. So,
Right.
Including that SMART test we talked about. So we're going to reduce bias, and hopefully at the end of the day, going back to Sandy Aston, we're going to increase the student stretch. Like, I'm hoping all these things get deployed, and we have a transformation in our own educational system.
Right. Well, interesting. You mentioned before, and it seems like this plays into it really well. This idea of both individualizing the instruction and also using predictive algorithms to take a look at different points and go, okay, that if you did this, here's likely outcomes, versus if you went to this through this curriculum, it fits these things better, or it's a better fit for your skills or where you want to go or whatever. So that's really interesting, because it is a much more proactive way to think of education, and also of using tools to help students with education, than I think we've maybe done. I mean, I don't know about you, but I sort of wandered in the door and went in a bunch of different directions for years. So it would have been useful to
Exactly.
have something to help me figure out where I should go. Um, Although I'm not sure I would have thought I would be a podcast host by the time anyway, who knows, right? Interesting though. Well, so we talk a lot about the student focus piece, which is obviously critical for across the whole idea of what we're doing with higher ed. But I'm just curious, and you mentioned a little bit about reducing overhead, automating, increasing productivity. But are there other things internally that institutions are doing, like for teacher experience, or maybe in planning and that sort of thing? Are there other ways that they could use AI that are helping faculty and just the institution in general increase its ROI?
Right. Yeah. It's sort of, if we looked at, say, the HR area, we could certainly start doing more around workforce planning, recruiting, development, succession planning.
Mm,
We're already starting to see, and there's areas for bias in this one. This one's getting a lot of criticism. But if you can start to remove the bias, it's good. Is a sifting through, say, CVs to find a short list of candidates for a role. And then other areas, I've got a colleague friend of mine that runs a leadership development company that services a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And one of the unique things that they do in assisting to hire people is they look at what the organization wants in terms of that leadership style. Am I do I need a manager? Do I need a change agent? And then they do a behavioral analysis of the team that they will be working with, to both find out if that team could align with a future candidate. And so the candidate takes an assessment. So they try to find the best fit to achieve the organizational objective. So that's an area. So that's just
great.
employee recruitment. There's employee experience, digital mentors. And I know you mentioned this already, but the ability for somebody in their job to have 24/7 access to information, and even further than that, having a mentor that actually knows strengths and weaknesses of the person and can help them with recommendations on training and things that they need specific to their job. And then blockchain again, I'm not sure where that's all going to go. Like, some people have talked about using it for employee credentialing and being able to have standard, verifiable, accurate record of employee qualifications. But it could also, a variety of financial transaction, whether it be third parties that are sponsoring students, could be validated through that. It could be, and this is an area where there's a big hole in a lot of universities I see, where departmental recharges are occurring, but it's not like it's a contract between the two in often cases, and that's necessary. And so there's often case just mistakes being made, not maybe intentionally, in that whole department recharge.
Mm.
And then outside the institution, and thinking more globally about student transcripting, I'm not sure why that isn't on a blockchain, right?
Mm.
We get it done at an institution level, but what if we had the whole academic record sitting in
Yeah.
blockchain somewhere?
Yeah,
And
I know
then,
there's been some experiments around that across different institutions, but it's always been very, compartmented at one or two institutions versus why can't we just build a system that does that,
right.
which does make a lot of sense from an employment and credentialing sort of perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. And certainly curriculum planning, right?
Mm.
Being able I mean, what we typically see, right, is you're rolling one term over to the not to the following term, but the next year's term. So the fall is moving over to the next year's fall. But you could get more precision maybe in that, in terms of analyzing the macro level of students, their needs, et cetera, and then doing more course planning that way. But it's a lot of data coming in, including
Right.
all the students' degree objectives and that kind of thing. But that could be there, and then budgeting, forecasting, enrollment
Mm.
forecasting, those types of things are actually easy use case.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity there, and to me, that's very exciting. I think could really offer, improved student experience, improved teacher experience, faculty, and just in general, maybe increase the ROI of the whole educational experience. Yeah, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today.
Okay.
I can definitely come up with a bunch more things to talk about, but I suspect we'd lose the audience at some point. Um, Before we let you go, one thing I really like to do at the end is just get you to help the audience, by recommending somebody, a thought leader, an author, somebody that's important in your career or that you think would be really helpful to the audience, so that they can, go check it out and read or follow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have a couple here for you. So one book I can recommend is Trustworthy AI by Bina
Mm.
Amanat, and she's the executive director of Deloitte's Global AI
Mm.
Institute, and she helps answer questions, about ethical challenges in AI and how we can trust the tools we use. And so it's a fascinating book. It's all about
Interesting.
making sure that we're fair, impartial, we respect privacy, we're transparent. We have explainable use of AI, right? Which is often, it's
Mm.
like, it's in a black box. Well, no, we gotta know how we're evaluating and what the data is. The other book I'd recommend, and this goes back to human potential. It's not directly related to AI, but
Mm.
it's thought provoking in terms of how can AI help with potential. So the other book is Hidden Potential by Adam Grant, and he's an organizational psychologist at the Wharton Business School, and has been their top rated professor, rated by the students 7 years in a row, and a fabulous
Wow.
speaker. Wonderful if he's ever in your area. Definitely worth seeing.
Hmm.
And then a person to follow, and you probably, it's probably no shock to anybody, is Primavera de Filippi at the Berkman Klein Center for
Hmm.
Internet and Society at Harvard University.
Yep.
So her research focuses on legal challenges and opportunities of blockchain and
Hmm.
AI, as well as how to improve institutional governance through greater confidence and trust. And she has a book called Blockchain and the Laws, one book, which has got lots of papers out
Hmm.
there and just, interesting thought leader,
Yeah.
different approach. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. That's great. And Mike, thanks so much for joining today. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the opportunity. So,
Great.
um, good. Thank you.
Thanks. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. And for more on AI and other software research reports and posts, check out the arionresearch.com/blog and /research reports. And don't forget to join us next week. I'm Michael Fawcett, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.